morning, everyone, and thanks so much for inviting FirstNet here today. My name's Parkinson, as I mentioned earlier. Don't let the accent throw you. I was born in Philadelphia, but grew up in South Africa, so we're not quite outsourcing everything just yet. We're getting there, I'm sure. So just a little bit of background on my role. I used to work for Congressman Peter King for about 6 years in Congress, and he was the first member of Congress to introduce legislation to reallocate the D block to public safety. So I helped, I wrote that bit, and have been intricately involved during my time on Capitol Hill with all of that. And then when the legislation was passed on February 22nd, 2012, I left my position and eventually came on board with FirstNet to head up the government affairs positions here. GR is really going to be part of the entire outreach program, and I'll really spend a lot of time explaining our vision with regards to outreach, state consultation specifically, going for the next few months into 2014. So 2014 is really the year that we see ourselves making enormous strides forward with FirstNet. You know, up to this point, as I mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of difficulty identifying and being able to bring on board public safety figures, technology experts to be part of the FirstNet team. But with some changes that we're hopefully making, we really envisage a huge leap going forward in 2014. And I'll explain that as we go forward. So really the fundamental start of any presentation when we talk about FirstNet is why are we here? As many of you know, this was birthed out of the recommendation 27 from the 9/11 Commission, the need to allocate interoperable spectrum, wireless spectrum to public safety to build a public safety network. We're really here to save states money and, more importantly, to save lives. You know, we all in this room understand the issues of interoperability throughout the country, and be that LMR, be that data, and I think this is going to be the key going forward. And so sorry, I like to walk around a little bit, so I'm just going to excuse me if I get in the way. This is really the singular focus we have, is to build this nationwide interoperable network. And one of the problems I think going forward that we all can relate to is the issue of interoperability. We have run into so many instances where sheriffs, police officers coming from one county to another just all of a sudden can't speak to each other. If they're Paul Fitzgerald, Sheriff Fitzgerald, Story County, Iowa, who sits on the FirstNet board, when he testified in Congress back in 2009, I think, 2010, he gave example after example of where this was a major issue going forward. And so there are examples, all of you in law enforcement can really provide a ton of examples of why this is necessary. So that is just the mantra going forward, is to ensure the building, deployment, and operation of the network. So where are we so far? Where have we come from? So this just gives you a brief 2013 milestone update, and going back really to, I want to start just with this 10 technical RFI piece. And just before that, since we have LRX in the room, it's worth noticing that we did the LRX SMLA back in June. So in July, we released 10 technical RFIs. We received over 300 responses to those RFIs, focusing on the core as well as the radio access network we ran. Later on, I believe it was in September, we released an application RFI and received an enormous number of interest in that. Just on the 10 technical RFIs, someone mentioned devices earlier on, we received 54 responses to that device RFI. So I mean, that's a hell of an impressive number, and something we're feeling very encouraged about, how industry is really identifying the role that public safety, and especially obviously FirstNet, is going to be able to play in the future. I was brought on board in July along with TJ Kennedy, and obviously we had Bill D'Agostino, our GM, on board since April. And that was really, as I said before earlier, TJ and I were, I think, number 3 and number 4 employees. In August, the board approved the 2014 budget and operating plan. It's a $194 million budget going forward. Again, that just creates the blueprint of what we envisage to accomplish in 2014. And finally, we reached, in December last year, negotiations finished on November 15th, where the board signed SMLAs with Adams County, and Adams County, sorry, that's one of those. We've got four signed SMLAs with the original 7 BTOPs out there. And we're currently negotiating with Harris County in Texas. They don't have a BTOP, they had a DHS port security grant to focus on LTE. and we're hopeful that we can reach an agreement with that in the near future. So what I really want to focus on now is state outreach and consultation updates, and this is the major piece going forward. On the right there, you can see just a blueprint of what our website is going to look like. We hope that website will be going live sometime in the next week or two. That's going to be firstnet.gov. It's purely going to be an informational website. We're not going to be asking folks to sign up to services or anything like that. Given what's happened with government websites in the last sort of 6 months, we're very mindful that this has to be a one-stop shop for information, and that's what we anticipate it being. We've got over 120 pages worth of information. I know, I've been proofreading them, so maybe the accent you'll see the bits that I wrote in there. It's not quite the American jargon. But that being said, it's, we think it would be a fantastic portal for information that you all can leverage going forward. With the outreach overview, we're really going to be focusing on these key areas. Our monthly conference calls with the Sparks, I'm sure a number of you have been aware of this. This has been going on, and maybe you've already been on that, Karen. I know you have, certainly. Outreach materials, you've got some in the packet that Karen kindly printed off for everyone. But that's just the start. As we bring on our communications team, our communications director, as well as the support staff, we're hoping to put presentations similar to this up on our website so that anyone who wants information on FirstNet can just go to it, either watch the YouTube link or download the presentation prior to any meeting taking place. We think that's going to be a tremendous tool going forward. It's also very important that we focus on the tribal community outreach. And as Peter here, this group has already looked at some of the 111 tribes in California. Well, there are 566 federally recognized tribes throughout the United States. And whilst we have to focus on the state process, there's some states, for example, Oklahoma, 70% of the state of Oklahoma is covered by tribal land. So it's vital that we go forward and work with those 70%. Yeah. And please, if you have any questions going forward, just interrupt me. I'm happy to answer them as we go through. It's also important too here that we go through the local associations. You know, California is a perfect example. Barry, I'm pleased to see that you're here. The Bay Project. It's a shame that we weren't able to reach an SMLA with the organization there, but the Bay Area is going to be a vitally important piece of the California network. Same goes for LA Rick. In Pennsylvania, I've been there on numerous occasions. They have an issue there where Pittsburgh and Philadelphia sort of see themselves as the shiny beacons on the hill, which is perfectly fine, but there's that massive rural section in the middle of the country, in the middle of the state, that really needs to be focused and paid a lot of attention to. How do we incorporate, how do we develop the state plan, or take into account the major metropolitan areas, and the same emphasis on rural community. The rural coverage is one of the main focuses in the legislation, that we have an actual mandate to go out and cover. So it's balancing those two. That'll be very important. So how do we envisage going about doing this? And really it's the regional structure we think is the best way. You'll see there a map that I'm sure a lot of you recognize as the 10 FEMA regions. There's no point in FirstNet coming along and not learning the lessons of the past. There have been a number of federal grants, a number of federal programs that have worked, some very well, some not so well. We have to leverage that experience. We have to leverage what has worked and what hasn't. And why reinvent the wheel when we can copy a regional outreach map that everyone understands? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to establish 10 regional offices in the FirstNet regions that copy the FEMA regions. The two offices that have been established already are the headquarters in the Region 3 area, which will be the National FirstNet headquarters in Reston, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And the second are the Boulder Labs out in Boulder, Colorado, in FEMA Region 8, FirstNet Region 8 too. That's where our technical team will be based, and that's where we certainly envisage working very closely with the PSCR labs, the Public Safety Communications Research Labs out there through NIST. So again, these are the focus areas that the regional teams will be looking at, and each each regional office will be headed by a regional coordinator. That will be a FirstNet regional head, and it's our vision that in FEMA Region 9, this area here, that individual will eventually be reporting directly and working with the board here in California. Again, we're going to focus on two nationwide teams. We're going to have a tribal team to deal and to work specifically with tribes, as I mentioned before, 566 of them, the body. We probably won't be able to hit every single one all the time, so there'll have to be an organizational structure in place there. And then the federal outreach team. The Emergency Communications Preparedness Center, the ECPC, is administered by DHS OEC, and that is really going to be the clearinghouse for all federal communication. We are organizing a single federal point of contact for all agencies. There are 14 of them who are represented on the ECPC, and we think that's probably the best way to ensure there's federal coordination going forward.
Hey Ed.
Yes.
Do you envision, I know it's early, but do you envision that these regions being kind of keeping the same numbers and names so that the FEMA Region 9 will become the FirstNet Region 9, or have any sense of how?
Yeah, I mean that's so just FEMA Region 9. We're not going to be working within FEMA. We're not going to be working probably all together with FEMA, but absolutely. Part of the hope is as we establish, we'll just use FEMA Region, FirstNet Region 9. So we'll have a director, then we're also going to be drawing public safety figures to come and join FirstNet. We have to pull the local and state folks who understand how things work in California. There's no point in someone from Washington, D.C. coming out here to tell you all how to do things. That's just not going to work. And so identifying retired or current police, fire, EMS, 911 experts, technical experts to come on board and join the FirstNet team in these regional offices, that's what we're looking for. That's the kind of vision that we have going forward.
My point was just that to keep the numbering the same with FEMA, it's going to be easier for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly what we'll do. Yeah. Sorry.
Does federal include military? With the amount of military in California, that's a huge issue.
It certainly can. The key that so with regards to DoD, we're working actually very closely with DoD. They've set up a similar board structure to what you all have done here. And that internal DoD meeting, I actually was just there last week. They're trying to bring together all branches of the military as well as DARPA and other groups so that they have coordination at their level. It reports through to the ECPC, which is our federal body through which we can interact with. I mean, National Guards is going to be a huge part of this going forward. How do we leverage the fire and police forces on military bases? They are first responders. In a number of instances, those fire and police stations within a military base have got agreements with the local community outside the base. So where's the interaction there, and how do we take advantage of that? Those are all part of the early discussions that we have, because that's fundamental going forward. Thank you.
And we met with, in my office with the DoD point of contact last week.
Joe Wassel?
Yes, Joe Wassel. And he was really committed with working with us to make sure that the military is totally involved in what we're doing.
Joe Wassel's been great, and
yes.
I think the key over there, the relationship that we actually fortunately have got, is Joe reports directly to Terry Takai, who's on our board. Terry is this DoD CIO, as well as the ex-CIO from Michigan and California. So that's just a lucky tool that we have at our resources, and I mean, we all know Terry Takai, and she's probably one of the more impressive people I've ever met. So I think we're in a very, very fortunate position with DoD going forward. I think that'll be a really worthwhile relationship.
And we were very pleased when we were able to meet him. Yes.
Yep. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on camera. So preparing to support network, I mean, the role that states going forward are going to have, it's going to be very important that our central body, that is FirstNet, we can't do it all. We're going to rely on state point of contacts. We're going to rely on boards such as this. We're going to rely on public safety figures who share our vision with technology, who understand the role going forward, that it will save money, and it will ultimately save, more importantly, will save lives. And it's understanding these sort of areas that we, that we can work together. We've got to leverage LTE. That's the legislation calls. That's the technology we have to adopt. And it's as the standards process for LTE move forward, that's going to be a really, really important structure to work with, especially with the PSCR. We have to ensure that we meet public safety's quality reliability standards. Our Public Safety Advisory Committee, the PSAC, is comprised of 41 public safety groups and a variety of others. And it's understanding the expertise that public safety have and leveraging that expertise and adopting that into the network is going to make this successful. I keep hearing a lot when I speak around the country that, well, this is just another network. It's like, no, this is a dedicated public safety network that has to ensure ruthless preemption and priority. I mean, we talked earlier about having an incident where public safety is all of a sudden kicked off because a bunch of TV show cameras come in, and that's not going to be the same. That's not going to how FirstNet's going to work. So state consultation. This is one of the key areas in 2014 that we're focused in on. So it's very important going forward that consultation, that you will really envisage this as, and this is certainly how we envisage it, is an iterative process. This isn't going to be FirstNet coming in for a 3-day workshop, having a decent conversation, 6 months later, here's your plan, California, sign it or walk away. That's the exact opposite. I think we can all sympathize with how federal programs have worked in the past, some again, not so well, others have. And I think understanding how those ones that have worked well, you have to adopt those lessons learned into the consultation process. So we're going to be really focusing on this critical information. Data planning development will be iterative. I mean, it's a multi-phased, multifaceted approach as we go forward. And it's really together, the stakeholders in FirstNet have engaged in this process. And I think that's going to lead to the successful development of these state plans. So this is sort of a vision and how we see it going forward. Starting from the bottom left there with industry input, just in no particular order, but NGOs, utilities, and commercial carriers. I mean, commercial folks, we're going to have to leverage what commercial what the commercial carriers have got. We're going to have to need network partners, especially early on with the development of FirstNet. But there'll be a role for NGOs, there'll be a role for utilities to play. We went to Oklahoma City and to Moore, Oklahoma, to look at the disaster site from the May tornadoes last year that they had that absolutely devastated the town. And one of the things that the police chief and the fire chief too mentioned to us while we were out there was when the tornado was actually coming straight for the Moore fire station. I mean, they thought, well, this is a brand new facility, they just got all their new engines and trucks there. So what they did was they removed the trucks and drove them out of the disaster path. But the problem was when they were trying to return to this disaster site, their power cables were strewn all over the road and they couldn't get back into the site. Well, we need to have coordination with the power companies. We have to have coordination with utilities so that those folks can correlate information and get back into disaster zones. That's just one such example. Federal input, I mentioned the ECPC, federal responders and infrastructure owners. We had great conversations with the FBI late last year. They have about 3,000 towers throughout the United States. Well, how do we leverage that? And how do we ensure if we do take part ownership of these telecom towers, that local control is maintained? That's really, really important.
And just before you go on, I see that we have a state plan and a governor decision and things. Is the goal for all the states, basically, all the regions, to basically end up with the same kind of product, same way of doing things, or is it going to just California can veer one way and Oregon veer a different way, or what's the goal?
That's a great question, and I think that's part of the vision going forward. So the plan is, and I'll get to it a little bit later on, but the needs in California are very different to the needs of Delaware, which are very different to the needs of Kentucky. And that's the thing. We're going to have a minimum baseline of technology and really a starting phase, which I'll show you all in a minute. And once each state reaches this minimum checklist, then we go ahead with the consultation. Certain states like California, just to complexity, geographic size, the number of programs that exist out here, will probably take a long time to get to a state plan. That consultation has to go through multi phases, and that'll make it very complicated. Again, just use Delaware as an example, just purely based on geographic size, population. That should probably take a lot shorter than what California has to focus on. You guys have to deal with earthquakes out here. They don't. You will have typhoons and the drought that's being experienced in this country. At the moment, Delaware doesn't. And so, what are the areas? Forest fires is another fantastic example out here. You don't find too many of them in Delaware at this time of year. So how do we take those unique aspects that are applied to a certain state and design the FirstNet RAN, state RAN, that can meet the needs of California? But bottom line is, each state will eventually plug into the FirstNet core, and they have to meet certain technological standards so that interoperability is ensured throughout the nation. And I think that's one of the big things. An example we use is we had great conversations the other day with the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Search and Rescue Team. They're one of the best in the world. They've gone to Haiti, they've gone to Chile, they've gone to many, many disaster sites throughout the world. And if there's an earthquake, God forbid, in California, these guys have to have the ability to fly in here, turn on their systems, and they're ready to go, fully interoperable with the folks that they need to be interoperable with. And so it's adopting those minimum standards of technology that will allow that to happen. But the needs of the local community, the local fire and police and sheriff organizations in California will have to meet those standards. So there's a balance that needs to be worked out. Is that okay? And so with the state consultation, you have to interact with, through the state point of contact, the state, local, tribal, regional, rural, and metropolitan areas. What are the needs in the desert out in California versus the needs up in Northern California? How will LA region and the Bay region be looked at, and how will San Francisco, San Diego, and how those needs within the metropolitan area versus the hills out east, how will those interact? And eventually all of this will be plugged into that state plan, and then that state plan will be presented to the governor for his or her opt-in, opt-out decision. And we're really hoping to try and develop an environment of opting in. We think it makes the most sense. But ultimately, opt-in, opt-out, we're really focused on is ensuring interoperability. And that's the number one thing.
Going back down to industry input, is, I know a lot of work's going on with different, for example, MIT Lincoln Labs is doing a lot of work with Virtual USA on these issues. Are those considered NGOs, or how are you getting academic and civilianized DoD input?
Well, so part of the plan through us outreach is not only to develop experience with DoD experts or whoever, but also to tap into that public safety and private sector experience. Virtual USA, born out of Virtual, Alabama, when I was on the Hill and through DHS, it's a great program, and it's one that I think could be really helpful in adopting on this. But we have to leverage that. We don't exactly have a specific plan how we can tap into MIT versus how we can tap into Caltech or anyone like that. But going forward, I mean, you all as state representatives will be able to bring that kind of expertise to the development of that state RAN. Maybe there's an option where if you know of expertise, core expertise or something like that, making that available, making that knowledge knowable to our senior management, that would be a really interesting development going forward. So I think that's sort of the relationship. It's understanding what tools and what expertise exists in your state and making that available to firsthand. I think it'd be only advantageous for the development of the network to take advantage of that. We don't have a specific appointed person just yet in charge of that, but that could be something we do.
I'll just send them to you.
Yeah. That'd be good. So defining the process towards the state plan, I won't spend too much time on this because each one of these is broken down in the slides coming in a bit, but really, the initial consultation, allowing Safety Phase 1, we're about to get to that phase. I know that there's going to be a Western States workshop in Phoenix in March, I believe, with the SLEEK team. First time we'll be represented at that meeting, so that'll be a really good opportunity to again interact. Starting from the top down, state RAN design, again, iterative design reviews, preliminary and many others afterwards. Asset identification with SLEEK Phase 2. I think one of the things in asset identification is what state assets are available, what local assets are available. How will FirstNet be able to take advantage of them? Can they take advantage of them? For example, in Pennsylvania, Major Scott Neal, who's the POC out there, he said, look, they have an LMR system out there with 1,000 towers. Now, 300 of them are hardened to the needs of public safety. About 700, probably not well enough. So we maybe only saw the 1,000 figure, the local knowledge and local expertise. He said, well, only 300 of those are really applicable to FirstNet. Well, that's the kind of information we're talking about. And how does FirstNet take advantage of those? Well, that again will be worked out during this consultation phase. State operations too, it's all customized to the state. The needs out here will be different to the needs of Delaware. And I think that's a really important vision to remind ourselves as we go forward. And ultimately developing the state plan. But here the baseline state analysis lines up with the initial phase of the development of the state plans. It goes through these 5 areas here. I've updated information on FirstNet progress to date. We're hopeful that the website will be able to help. We really are trying to push the hiring of these regional coordinators and these regional outreach teams. We're looking to develop state teams, we're looking to develop as much outreach as possible and drawing from local expertise. High-level process flow is going to be really, really important. Understanding how do we take advantage of boards like this? Where are we falling short as person, as an organization, and where can groups like this really step up? The preliminary coverage objectives map for the state. I'm not going to hark on too much of this. OEC's done a great job, and I'll let Brian have his moments and some of that. But that's a hugely important piece. We work very, very closely with OEC going forward. We think that the coverage workshops that they've been doing are a tremendous tool, and the fact that they don't cost the state anything. We really have been encouraging a lot of states to take part in those. The user baseline, identifying who will have access to the network. Roughly there are about 5.3 million first responders in the country. Is that where we're going to stop at? Do we want to engage utilities? What kind of utilities do we want to engage on? Do we look at second responders? And in what circumstances? A lot of those decisions on who is on the network at what time will be made at the local level through the state consultation. But it's important to identify what we think, FirstNet, what we think would be a good place to start.
Question on that.
Yeah.
Can each state be different?
Well, I think there'll be a baseline. I think first it will certainly say, this is what we think you all should do. But I'm sure there will be some leverage with regards to states. What exactly that will be, we don't know quite yet. But I think through the consultation phase we'll get a much better idea exactly on what kind of who we think should have access to the network and when, because that's also very important. Mm-hmm. And then outreach materials. They can be used, customized by the state. As I mentioned before, while we're building a national network here, one of the things we always keep saying is we're really focusing on local control and adopting the network and adopting each state around the specific needs of that state will be fundamental to the success of the network.
I want to follow up on what Karen just asked. Sort of would the plan look something like FirstNet sets kind of the baseline largely defined set of users, eligible users for the networks, and then the states and maybe even the local cities can decide which of those users they actually want to put on the network, or which are appropriate, or is it the state and locals who are making the decisions on does this group of users qualify as a eligible user under some guidelines that are set by FirstNet? Is that, or is it too early to even?
It's a little early, frankly. We're still developing just the minimum checklist baseline for what state consultation will look like. Mm-hmm. So we've got 5 people on outreach. We've got 3 people who have the focus on developing these state plans. And until we can hire those experts who know what the needs are for each state, then I don't think we'll be able to fully answer those sort of questions. Yeah. That being said, we have to, during the development of our business plan, we have to identify, well, what kind of numbers are we talking about here? How many devices are we talking about? Who here's got one cell phone in their household? All of us. Who's got 2? Who's got 2 cell phones and an iPad?
I've lost count.
Who's got maybe 4 devices? Right. So, that's now just in our personal capacity, but what about doing our jobs? I have 2 cell phones right here, my laptop's in my bag over there, and I've got my PC back at the office. So that's 4 devices for one person. How do we know what devices we'll be able to plug into the network and when? These are the things we still need to understand, and as we develop those, we'll be able to hopefully share those much better, so that you all, as you develop your understanding on the user base and so on in each state, you can have some sort of expertise going forward. So these are sort of things that we think one thing, we think this is the simple, this is what we're learning. There's no such thing as a simple question, right? And understanding all the little bits that come off that will be fundamental to success. So getting states ready for consultation. This is this checklist that I was mentioning earlier, and hopefully again this will be coming out to state POCs shortly. But we'll focus on those 3 main areas: outreach and education, governance, assessment and validation. And this checklist will really be this baseline from which we'll be able to kick off state consultation. As soon as states, we want to give all states an equal footing, so we're really not favoring one state or another. We ultimately have to cover the entire network, the entire country, but we have to make sure all states have an equal opportunity to get out there and start focusing on the development of their state plans as soon as possible. So by kicking off and giving all the same information out to all the states at the same time, we think that's the best way about going about it. Some states are really forward-thinking in their planning. Other states are a little bit behind, but that's quite all right. We certainly don't think we'll get 50 plans, 50 initial state consultation plans back from states all at the same time. If we do, then we have to hire a lot more people. But this is sort of the thinking going forward. Asset identification aligns Safety Phase 2. You know, this chart here on the right really sort of identifies the main areas that we're going to be looking at. You know, I'll put attention down here that within coverage objectives. You know, it's really going to be up to the state. Do you want to focus more on rural communities or metropolitan areas? Are you looking for in-building coverage, or are you thinking you need to extend your coverage out, say, 5 miles, 6 miles off the ocean in California's case, so that you can coordinate with the Coast Guard? That's just another example. And the state plan is going to be designed around the needs of the state. And I think that's, again, where this idea where you all are the main input and you design the state plan as you guys decide where you need your objectives.
I have a question on that, because I've heard other presentations where the entire state was going to be covered.
Well,
this sounds like that where we have absolutely no people in a very rural area, we might be able to take that off the list.
Well, no, I mean, part of the area that we have to look at is in the legislation, we have to cover the entire United States. If we just cover population, if we cover 99.7% of the population of the United States, we leave 35% of the geographic area of the United States uncovered. That's a mass the size of India. And so we have to think strategically. We only have $7 billion, and we can leverage the excess capacity in certain circumstances of the network, but we have no idea what amounts that will be or what that will look like. So how do we take advantage of the technology and other technologies to cover areas? One such example could be deployables. There could be mobile units. How do we take the network with us? If there's maybe no person in a 100-mile radius, but then all of a sudden Burning Man Festival comes along, are you going to have a network tower there year in, year out? Probably not. But how do you leverage technology to bring the network with you so that ambulances, firefighters, and law enforcement have the opportunity to have coverage during the 7-day chaos that is Burning Man? That's just another part of it. How that's going to work and how that's going to look like, we're still developing, but we're certainly mindful that rural communities and wilderness areas need to be covered. Another good example are forest fires that you all have here in California. Probably won't be able to have a tower covering all rural wilderness in the United States. It's just not feasible. But how do we take the network with us? And how do we use technology to our advantage? That's something that, first, public safety haven't had the ability to do up until this point. And I think that's a really, really important vision going forward. Another one too, access all assets, commercial and public. We're going to have to work with commercial carriers. We have to take advantage of network partners, and that's something going forward. What that network partnership will look like, we don't know just yet. But we have a lot of interest from the commercial partners and commercial carriers, and we think through these negotiations and adopting these guiding principles will be fundamental. We've got to give a better service to public safety that's faster than what they experience right now at a cheaper cost. Because if you are paying $40 for your Verizon toggle, and then comes FirstNet saying, well, here's a service that's roughly the same, but it costs you $80, that's not going to work. That's not going to work, especially in areas like volunteer firefighters. How do we leverage bring your own devices? Is that something we have to be able to look at? Because a lot of volunteer firefighters can't afford a $300 or $400 smartphone, let alone a $5,000 radio. So we have to think strategically. We've got to think real world. So the state RAN design process. This is just again areas that we see this going forward. Once we've been doing a lot of the consultation, once we've started identifying assets, and we move through the SLIG P phase 1 and phase 2 stages, and are able to develop a preliminary design review for what the state plan might look like. That then comes to the state, and you guys have been integrally part of the development of that PDR, up to that point. Any changes, suggestions, then comes back to FirstNet. We then work with you all to identify, well, where do we need to improve the plan? Where are the holes? How do we work to get to the next phase? And again, it goes back and forth, until we get to a phase, we get to this final point where we're happy to go move forward. Now, there will have to probably be decisions along the line that maybe we disagree on. That's surely part of any negotiation. But the key point about how this iterative approach is to ensure that there are no surprises, we're not forcing anything down anyone's throat, and the design of the grand plan is a state-driven approach. That's fundamental to this. And we've got to jointly develop these trade-offs and priorities. You can't have everything, right? We've got $7 billion. We also know that certain states will want certain things that other states don't want. So how do we play those off? How do we understand where the priorities are? And that's something that the state will ultimately decide. State operations too. The key steps here are those 4 points at the top there: security, training, prioritization, and local control. We have to ensure that all the areas of consultation that are laid out in the law are followed. That's something that is hugely important. The design of the RAM plan is cost effective and can be maintained and operated throughout the growth of the network. It's important to remember too that LTE is only 4G. What happens when the network evolves into 5G? We have to make sure this is sustainable. We also have to make sure that this can change and update with the technology as it improves. A good example is LMR. This isn't an LMR network. We're not interested in replacing LMR. That's vitally important that folks out there continue to fund LMR, use LMR. That's the lifeblood of public safety with data. But we will be able to offer probably commercial-grade voice. Voice after all is just an application, right? So, but what happens then when the standards are developed in 10, 15, 20 years' time, who knows when, for 3GPP standards for mission-critical voice? VoLTE is going to leverage, is going to change the way that we do things. We're not interested in getting there yet. That's many, many years from now. And we're not interested in replacing LMR. We're not in that business. But it'll be important to decide, it'll be important for public safety to ultimately decide when that will, and when you all are happy, then maybe that's a conversation that takes place. So, but it's vitally important that leveraging, as I said, the training, security, prioritization, local control going forward, and the state is integrally involved in all that. So the final state plans, it'll cover these areas. It addresses the area of consultation required by law, ensures that public safety has had robust involvement. I've been harping on about that quite a bit. This is an iterative approach. Sorry if I sound like a stuck gramophone, but that's something we really need. We're really pushing to get across there. It's given an opportunity for, again, state sparking governing body, this board, to have one last go over before submitting to the government. So that's it really, and just before, if you've got any additional questions, I think it's important too to remember, as we develop and as we grow with FirstNet, we need bodies like this. We need your help. We have to ensure that as we build this nationwide model and as we build this network, we have input from the local level, and we can't do it without support. So, as I mentioned earlier, with those 10 regional positions, the 10 regional offices, if anyone's interested in coming on board, we'd love to have you. I'm a firm believer in making a shameless plug. We need the local expertise, the technical, even in my area, political. A good example is just to touch on this political piece. We understand that in a number of instances, in a number of states, the governor has the authority, he or she, to sign off on the state plan, no questions asked. However, in maybe an opt-out situation, this is certainly the case in Washington State, if the governor supplies obligations for $20 million or more on the state, he or she has to go to the state legislature in order to get their permission to sign off on this opt-out example. So we need to know who the key players are in that state, in the state legislature. I certainly don't at this stage. I went to Pennsylvania the other day, and met with the Public Safety Communications Subcommittee, well, it turned out the folks I needed to talk to were the Transportation Appropriations folks. And I wouldn't know that unless I had the local expertise. So again, things like that. I certainly will be coming to the board and to local areas, especially in the Bay Area and the LA area, to meet with mayors, meet with public safety experts. And I want to leverage groups like this going forward, and certainly so does TJ and Bill. So any other questions going forward? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned during the presentation there's $7 billion available, and is there any kind of set aside or plan, or is it kind of like whatever state or regions get there first? You know, they could have a great $5 billion plan and work fantastic, and then it gets to California and it's taking a little bit of time. We got $200 million left for you guys.
That's a great question.
I would doubt that it's all set aside, but I'll at least ask in hopes that maybe there's some plan.
Yeah. Well, if you divide the $7 billion by the 56 state territories, I think you come up with about 115 million each. It's very clear that, you know, California will probably be a lot more than what American Samoa might cover. But you know, this is it. And yes, we're very mindful that some of the states going forward will require a larger financial output than others. What exactly that will look like, we don't know. But we also think we've got a lot of time to figure that out. This isn't going to be probably come to the state, develop a plan in 3 months, and let's go. This will probably be a multi-month, in some cases it might take over a year to develop a state plan. And we'll have a much better idea on the financials going forward when we get there. But yes, I mean, yeah, that's something we're very mindful of.
Probably my favorite thing that you said so far was the comment about not replacing LMR. And that's because I think for most people in both the discussion of the rollout of D-Block and now about FirstNet, a lot of the conversations have been about the overall vision of where FirstNet can go. And so some of the conversations that I hear is people talking about radio purchasing for LMR, wondering, I'm about to make a major investment, should I wait for FirstNet? And so I think part of the outreach that is important to share is exactly what you shared today, specific to LMR, which is we aren't talking 2 or 3 years out, we're talking decade or better out before we get to that point. So I appreciate hearing that and sharing that out more often. While the vision is great and exciting, I think it's important for people to know that, like you put it, it is very data focused and data centric right now, and people should not be waiting to make radio infrastructure purchases based on the future of that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that that message is still relayed. Ultimately, mission critical voice over VoLTE will occur, but we're not the ones who are going to decide whether to use it or not. You guys are, and whenever that point is, it's going to be men and women in uniform deciding, well, okay, we're ready to go with. We're ready to continue with LMR, or we're going to happily move over to VoLTE. And who knows when that will occur. So it's, again, glad you picked up on that. Any other questions?
I just have one comment for the new board members. What we've been talking about at the state level in my office is that what we don't want this network to end up being is something that we decided at the state level. Because there are so many first responders that do not even work for the state of California. They work for the cities and the counties, and we need to make sure that we get the input from the first responder through all of this. So while you hear the discussion at the national level, we want to drive that same discussion down to the state level. We have a lot through CHP and CalFRN and our other public safety state agencies, but they just make up a percentage of the number of first responders in California. So this is truly a first responder, in our mind, centric type of a proposal. If we don't end up working well with FirstNet and getting the right device in the hand of the first responder, we've not done our jobs.
I think that's a great point, and a good example is the amount of outreach we've been doing to major metropolitan areas is a good example. The MCC, the major city chiefs. That's one area that we've been really trying to focus in on. Our interaction with LA, the Bay Area, the other BTOP, City of Charlotte. We're going to, I mentioned in the presentation, focus we're going to have to spend and pay to major metropolitan areas as well as rural telecom. The Competitive Carriers Association, made up of the 240 rural carriers in the country. How do we leverage that? How do we get their input and expertise. So we're really also trying to drive down to a local level the amount of outreach that we do. The legislation, we have to work through the state point of contact. Doesn't mean that we can't continue to communicate with everyone else.
Right.
And I think that's the really, really important piece going forward. Barry?
So a little bit of devil's advocate here. It sounds like that the FirstNet's plan is to kind of roll these plans out as states are ready to get them out. To me, that means it's the states that are simple will probably be able to go earlier. California is probably the most complicated state in the country in terms of how to build something like this. Do you have any advice on how we can get from the end of the line to maybe move up a little bit in terms of how can we tackle this huge job of planning this thing without it taking 5 years?
So that some of it's just 7 billion is still there.
Right.
Yeah, right.
That's a great point.
So the bank's not throwing in deep on
The big thing going forward that two parts about this. One, I'd say planning and preparation. That's got to be, governance is huge. And how well organized you are in the lead up to the planning and the development of the network is going to make a huge, huge impact going forward. We can all remember, we can all think of good examples where things weren't planned properly prior to kickoff of something happening, and then it was a disaster, right? Not talking about anything recently, but I'm just saying this is a classic example where we have to be able to. Everyone's got to be ready to go. There are certain states that are. I mean, I'm very honest. I mean, Florida is is well ahead of a lot of folks, definitely down the southeast region. They're certainly thinking about taking the lead and working well. And we're very impressed with what they're doing down there. Their governance structure looks good. Their thinking, their planning is really forward-leaning. I certainly encourage bodies like this to adopt a similar model. Let's also look at the financial ways that the financial tools that FirstNet has. We have the $7 billion in legislation. It also says we have to adopt user fees, but it also says we can lease excess capacity of the network. Now, the spectrum we have is probably our biggest asset. $7 billion is a lot of money, but I mean, we can all look at the H block at the moment that's currently being auctioned. It's standing at 1.2. Dish Network is saying they're going to buy it at 1.56. So there's a lot of money in the spectrum. And how do we leverage the excess capacity, if there is excess capacity of our spectrum, so that we can take that income, put it back into the maintenance, operation, and construction of other areas of the network? That's going to be a vital part of building out this network. Now, as far as other ideas going forward, I really can't stress the planning piece enough. Being involved, getting organized prior to FirstNet coming in, kicking off state consultation will be a really, really important part of this. But I mean, yeah, it's going to be a complicated it's going to be a complicated state for sure. But I think that also offers interesting opportunities. What's being carried out in LA is going to be, we were talking with Susan, we're really sort of saying, well, look, I mean, the lessons learned from that example possibly could be adopted throughout the state. Things that work well, things that don't work so well. And I think that's going to be interesting as things go forward. But complicated, yes. A lot of work ahead, absolutely. But if we don't do this right, and if we've got one chance to do this right, because if we don't do this right, then companies are waiting to swoop in and take over the spectrum, and the federal government, I mean, we all know how complicated financially things are at the moment. Some people on Capitol Hill aren't huge supporters of what we're trying to do. And that's the reality. So we're mindful that it's a huge, huge challenge. But if we're successful, then it's going to change the way public safety communicates for the next 70, 80 years. And I think that's too good of an opportunity to pass on.
So what is FirstNet's expectation on the amount of time for the consultation period for each state? And then you have to have some ideas when you would want to have the state planning process be buttoned up.
We want to get people on the network as soon as possible. We want to make that happen. What that time frame is, we honestly don't know. And it's really going to depend on the state. We're very mindful that there are political pressures at play here. There's also financial pressures. Let's just allude to that. But when we can get folks on, or the timeline around that, we just don't know at this point. A lot of it's going to really depend on states and those who are better organized and ready to go will be ready to go. And we think too that once people start seeing the benefits of the network, and once people start seeing others moving forward, there's going to be a lot of encouragement, a lot of competition to get forward. And we'll have to be ready for that. We certainly aren't looking to favor one state or another. Everyone's coming into this as far as that is concerned on an equal standard. Timeline though, I just don't have that.
Okay. I was just kind of curious. Usually when you have some sort of date certain, it helps everybody move forward with a common goal, but if there's no date, it's hard to get everybody excited about planning something when you don't know when it's going to be done. So we may put our own dates together for California as we think through this.
Yeah, and this is the first time that anything like this has ever been attempted. And I laugh in a way when I hear, well, how much, for example, that's slightly unrelated to your question, how much will the devices cost? How much will it be $40? Will it be $30? Well, Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint, they don't tell you 2 years, 3 years ahead of time how much your contract's going to be. And we're kind of in a similar sort of situation. We know it's got to be competitive. We know it's got to be a better service, equal if not better service that's dedicated. So these are kind of some of the parameters we have. We have a good idea of what those parameters will entail, but we don't quite know timelines or what it's going to exactly look like just yet.
And then I just have one other comment. I was out in Texas earlier last month, and was able to get a demonstration of what Harris County has. It's phenomenal. The communication that they can do and the information that they can send over a broadband network was pretty impressive. And if that's where we're really going, the end goal is really exciting for public safety.
Yeah, we really hope that we can sign an SMLA with Harris County. Todd Hurley's done a terrific job down there. Bill D'Agostino and our team were down briefing the governor's staff on this issue just last month too. So if it all works out, hopefully we can get close and make it happen.
Yeah, they said you guys were coming right about the time I was leaving.
Yep. Well, great. Thanks, everyone.